about Ukraine without Ukraine. And that's been a long-standing principle of this group. And I know Volodymyr is on the call and will be absolutely clear in relation to that. And along with that, that international borders cannot be and must not be changed by force. And again, that's a long-standing principle of this group. And alongside that, that any talk about borders, diplomacy, ceasefire has to sit alongside a robust and credible security guarantee to ensure that any peace, if there is peace, is lasting peace, and that Ukraine can defend its territorial integrity as part of any deal. And that's why this group was set up. That's why it's important we've all made the commitments that we have. And we made some real progress today, a very important call with President Trump earlier on in relation to security guarantees, as Emmanuel has just set out. And as we've said all along, we, the coalition, stepping up, showing what we will do, the plans we've put forward, credible military plans, and alongside that, the backing of the US. So we stand ready as a coalition to support the meeting on Friday and everything that I hope can flow out of it. Nothing is obviously guaranteed, and as Emmanuel has said and Friedrich has said, the President has agreed to debrief immediately afterwards so that we know what the next steps will be. But we're ready to support this, including through the plans that we've already drawn up to deploy a reassurance force once hostilities have ceased. It is important to remind colleagues that we do stand ready also to increase pressure on Russia, particularly the economy, with sanctions and wider measures as may be necessary. You can see the effect of those measures already, and we at the UK are preparing our next package of strong sanctions in that regard. So I think it's important that we all continue to work alongside President Trump, alongside President Zelensky, for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. I think it's important that this group stays in close contact. We are able to pull together meetings like this at relatively short notice, and we've shown over the last 6 or 7 months that whether it's in person, whether it's virtual, or combinations of both, we can have the opportunity to share our thoughts and our thinking. So thank you very much, Emmanuel. I think it's really important that we hear from colleagues, but to really reassure colleagues that the principles, the core framework that we're working to is the framework that we've taken into the meetings and the calls we've had this afternoon, which have gone well, and we've been able to show a real unity, I think, across quite a broad coalition that we now are. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Well, that was Keir Starmer opening that session of all those European leaders. You heard JD Vance saying he was on that same call, those 30 or so leaders just going through, and you heard Keir Starmer lay out the absolute basic positions that the Europeans have adopted, trying to bend the ear of the US president before, of course, he goes in and meets one-to-one with Vladimir Putin. That's seen as hugely important, hugely significant. We heard President Zelensky at that news conference a little earlier with Chancellor Merz saying that they'd all been talking with one voice, and he thought that was really significant ahead of Friday. Well, our correspondent James Waterhouse was at the earlier news conference with the German Chancellor, with Ukraine's president. He sent us this assessment.
Not the longest press conference after their summit with Donald Trump. The tone was serious, but they were keen to stress that there was a positive outcome. They listed a number of principles they say Donald Trump agreed to, including not negotiating on behalf of the Europeans and Ukraine. They say he agreed to the current front lines being the starting point of any negotiation, and they claim, he said, Ukraine would be able to defend itself in the long-term future. I tried to ask Mr. Zelensky whether he was going to make the trip to Alaska on the off chance. He sort of shrugged his shoulders and laughed, but the official message is no. but you really get a sense of what was at stake there. They clearly wanted to put on a united front, a single message to say, do not go over our heads. You need our backing for any kind of ceasefire. But of course, there is never the guarantee that Donald Trump might go into this Putin meeting and start repeating, as his other representatives have done, repeating Russian demands. And these are demands that are widely expected. Russia will want more than what it currently has in Ukraine. And for this part of the world, that is the real fear.
Well, that was James Waterhouse there in Berlin at that news conference. You're seeing pictures there on the screen. I just want to explain what they are, because they're the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and we are expecting to see Donald Trump arrive there in the next few minutes, and he'll be talking, I think, ostensibly about the hallmark honours that he is about to give out today, because, of course, he's there at the Kennedy Center. He has become the chair of the institution's board earlier this year, and that is significant, and they are laying out and mapping out a roll call of honours today. And the White House has also said that they are now weighing up how they plan to spend $250 million that the Republicans actually set aside in July for renovations to the centre as part of their tax and spending bills. So we will hear from the president, or certainly see him. Whether he talks about that call that he's had on Ukraine, we shall see. But the pictures are there, and you won't miss when the US president arrives there, and we certainly will dip in and hear a little of what he is saying. But let's return to what we've already heard out of Berlin, that news conference that James Waterhouse was just assessing for us, because our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams has also been talking to me, giving me his analysis ahead of the summit in Alaska and the importance of today's European gathering.
Look, I think this is a really important week, possibly the most important week for European diplomacy on Ukraine that we have seen so far. You know, the announcement of the summit in Alaska was greeted with a huge amount of
apologies to start with, Paul, but to come out straight away, because I was showing you those pictures from Washington, and there he is, the US president, at the microphone. So let's put the sound up.
Along with, in the bigger picture, a place called Washington, D.C. That is the bigger one, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But let's talk about right now the Kennedy Center, and I'm delighted to be here as we officially announce the incredibly talented artists who will be celebrated later this year at the 2025 Kennedy Center Honors. It's going to be a big evening. I've been asked to host. I said, I'm the President of the United States. Are you fools asking me to do that? Sir, you'll get much higher ratings. I said, I don't care. I'm President of the United States. I won't do it. They said, please. And then Susie Wells said to me, sir, I'd like you to host. I said, okay, Susie, I'll do it. That's the power she's got. But I just, so I have agreed to host. Do you believe what I have to do? And I didn't want to do it, okay? They're going to say, he insisted. I did not insist. But I think it will be quite successful, actually. It's been a long time. I used to host the Apprentice finales, and we did rather well with that. So I think we're going to do very well, because we have some great honorees, some really great ones. Since 1978, the Kennedy Center Honors have been among the most prestigious awards in the performing arts. I wanted one. I was never able to get one. This year, it's true, actually. I would have taken it if they would have called me. I waited and waited and waited, and I said, the hell with it. I'll become chairman, and I'll give myself an honor. Maybe I'm going to honor, next year we'll honor Trump, okay? This year, the board has selected a truly exceptional class of honorees. I mean, really exceptional. First is country music star, actor, and producer George Strait. Great. Over an extraordinary 4-decade career, George has sold more than 120 million records worldwide, amassed 60 #1 hits, wow, and produced 33 platinum certified albums, more than any other living American. That is amazing. He's believed by millions of people to just be as good as you can get, and he's beloved by hundreds of millions of people all over the world. He's really something, and they call him the king of country, and we know him very well, George Strait. Okay, please. Oh, it looks nice. You're a good-looking guy. I hope he still looks like that. Second is actor, singer, philanthropist, and star of the Broadway stage. One of my favorite talents. I think he's one of the greatest talents I've ever actually seen. I've always said, and just so we don't get in trouble, I'll say among the greatest artists in the world are the Broadway London actors back and forth. That's all they want to do, is they want to do Broadway and they want to do London. They want to do 8 shows a week, including matinee on Wednesday. And if you said make a movie, they can't even think about it. If you say go on television, they don't want to. All they want to do is be on the stage, the live stage, and it's amazing. But I've always said they're the most talented people. And this man may be the most of all. Michael Crawford is being honored.
Well, just the start of the roll call there that I suspect is going to take some while for Donald Trump to actually go through. As I say, he's there at the Kennedy Center. It's an iconic performing arts complex that, of course, Donald Trump has sought greater authority over there in Washington. It is the most prominent cultural institution, and others that he is aggressively trying to influence in these early months of his second term. So we will continue to monitor that. It's entirely possible with Donald Trump that he will veer into the main story of the day, which is, of course, that phone call he's had with European leaders on Ukraine. But it looks like he's going to be talking about the Hallmark honours for some while. So we will come away on the programme, but we will continue to monitor it here at the BBC. If he says something significant, we'll obviously return to that. Let's turn to some of the day's other important stories, though, because here in the UK, the Home Secretary says the public wants to see greater transparency following the announcement that the police forces here will be encouraged to disclose the ethnicity and nationality of suspects in sensitive cases. The new advice issued by the National Police Chiefs Council is aimed at countering the spread of disinformation. Philip Norton has more.
Disorder and riots last summer. It followed the murders of 3 young girls in Southport. What happened also highlighted a modern problem for policing: online misinformation. A lack of immediate details about the attack and the suspect from Merseyside Police was criticised. It's said to have created an information vacuum filled by false information spread online that the 17-year-old responsible was an illegal immigrant. 10 months later, a car ploughed into crowds celebrating at Liverpool Football Club's victory parade. The same police force this time released information about the suspect being a local white British man within 2 hours, an attempt to dampen any false speculation. But problems still exist. Last week, there were anti-immigration protests in Nuneaton after Reform UK accused Warwickshire Police of a cover-up for not revealing the immigration status and ethnicity of 2 men charged in connection with the alleged rape of a 12-year-old girl. The force fiercely denies the allegation, stating it was following official guidance. But now that guidance will be changed, with forces encouraged to reveal ethnicity and nationality details in high-profile cases.
Well, we welcome the guidance because this is a step forward, and we have been clear that we need greater transparency, and that's what the public want to see. But we have also asked the Law Commission particularly to look at what information can be released to make sure that we're not also affecting criminal trials that are underway.
The National Police Chiefs Council and College of Policing now says a suspect's ethnicity or nationality should be released if there's a risk of rising community tension, particularly cases which could pose a risk to public safety, lead to high levels of misinformation or disinformation, or where there is significant media or social media interest.
This is not about any one particular group or any one particular crime type. This is about those cases that hit the media, that the public want to know more information about, that there is community tension as a result of those cases. So it's not every case, but it is those ones where we feel that there are impacts on our communities and we need to do more to provide that reassurance.
The Conservative Party wants guidelines to go further, to also reveal a suspect's immigration status. That's a decision to be made by officials at the Home Office. But in a digital age, they say the public wants consistency and transparency. It's hoped providing facts will help keep misinformation to a minimum. Philip Norton, BBC News.
Straight to breaking news. Let me tell you that the Manchester Arena bomb plotter Hashim Abedi has been charged with 3 counts of attempted murder after 4 prison officers were injured at HMP Franklin Prison in County Durham back in April. That has come from counter-terrorism policing in the northeast. You may remember that incident in Franklin Prison. Well, let me just repeat that line that has just come into us, that the Manchester Arena bomber Hashim Abedi has been charged with 3 counts of attempted murder after 4 prison officers were injured in that incident at HMP Franklin in County Durham. That news has just come in. If there is more, we'll obviously return to it. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News.
Every generation has to fight to maintain democracy.
There's a thrill in not necessarily following a straight line, do you know what I mean? Trying things that are different.
Women are still judged by a different metric, and certainly judged by a different metric when they do something wrong.
I will continue on with a life of public service, so I will always support the charities and the people that mean so much to me.
When the big names talk, they talk to us.
Welcome back to Verified Live here on BBC News. Let us get updated in the situation in Gaza, because Gaza City has come under intense air attack again today as Israeli forces prepare to launch that operation to take over the city completely. A spokesperson for Gaza's Civil Defense Agency said the residential areas of Zaytun and Sabra had been hit for 3 days, causing, quote, massive destruction, with residents unable to recover the dead and injured. Well, it comes as 29 partners, including the UK, EU, Australia, Canada and Japan, issued a statement saying famine is unfolding in front of our eyes and urged action to reverse starvation. They demanded immediate, permanent and concrete steps to facilitate the entry of aid to Gaza. Well, a little earlier on the programme, I spoke to Caroline Vilman, who's project coordinator in Gaza for the charity MSF.
In the last few days, we definitely hear and see an intensification of the aerial attacks. I mean, we are with our clinic and our office based in one of the zones that is not evacuated. So we have not been directly affected, but it is very clear to anyone in Gaza City that the The airstrikes are increasing tremendously. One of the primary healthcare centers of the Ministry of Health that we support, of which we support the emergency room, yesterday dealt with dozens and dozens of wounded and killed in several aerial attacks in Sheikh Radwan, which is in the north of Gaza City. So we can definitely feel since maybe 6 days now that the attacks are stepping up.
I mentioned that letter signed by so many different countries, talking about humanitarian suffering reaching unimaginable levels, calling for restrictions to aid deliveries to be lifted, saying aid should never be politicised. You are there. As you are watching and seeing, is starvation being used as a weapon?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we have desperately been calling out of this for months now. So in the primary healthcare clinic where I work, the number of patients on our malnutrition program has increased 5-fold since May. These are children younger than 5 years old, as well as pregnant and lactating women. And we see indeed a pattern of hunger being used as a weapon against people, because it's not only the fact that not enough food is allowed to enter, it's also the chaos that has been created by allowing for people to become this hungry because the Israeli authorities have blocked aid for so long. This, of course, comes on top of the daily mass casualty incidents that we see at 8 sites. So the ones of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in the south, but also in the north where I am, whenever we see the trucks entering the Zikim border, desperate people, hungry people go towards these trucks and they get shot at. I spoke a few days ago with a patient in one of our facilities. The man has lost his arm and was shot in the back because as he left one of the sites where he was able to take some flour, he was shot by snipers. And this is the devastating, cruel reality that we see here every day.
Well, that was Caroline Williman from MSF talking to me from Gaza City a little earlier. We were showing you the pictures of President Trump at the Kennedy Center giving out those honours. Let's just quickly return.
But a few short months ago, I became chairman of the Kennedy Center, and we completely reversed it. We reversed what was happening. We ended the woke political programming, and we're restoring the Kennedy Center as the premier venue for performing arts anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. This has the potential to be anywhere in the world. We're going to make it something that people can't even believe. We have some unbelievable plans, and ultimately it's about the talent you get, though. You know, you can have a beautiful building, you can have nice marble walls, you can have nicely done columns, as I was saying, but if you don't have the talent on the stage, and we're going to get the best talent in the world. To that end, the world-renowned musical Les Mis had a phenomenal 5-week sold-out run this summer, beat projected revenues by 35%. And we've raised over $10 million in private funds from a lot of generous donors, and we closed the $26 million budget shortfall that they had before we got here. And with the help of Congress, we secured.
Well, Donald Trump continuing there. We will continue, as I said before, to monitor to see if he veers into the story of the day, the latest in terms of the war in Ukraine and that summit with Vladimir Putin. But you are watching BBC News.
The reality of being an athlete, where you're really trying to push to get those marginal improvements day in, day out, it is quite tough. I'm Dimitri Kutia, and I'm a Paralympic wheelchair fencer representing Great Britain. Fencing's like with anything, you know, you need to take a lot of work and time to understand the sport. I think now there's definitely a lot more pressure, especially after having competed at, you know, a few Paralympics now and having won major titles, including the Paralympic Games. Now it's become a question of how much better can I make everything that I do within the sports.
A sport like wheelchair fencing is really complicated. There's a lot of tactics, there's a lot of technical nuance, there's a lot of detail. We use some video-based systems and we use some other measurement technologies to be able to look at human movement. Typically we would use 2D on a regular basis. We'd use 3D to look at maybe a bit more of a nuanced question. We're using these little reflective markers, the idea being that they represent kind of joint centres. So we've got a camera directly overhead and we've got a camera over to this side. For the fencers, we're particularly interested in the torso and the arm movement. What will happen then is we'll capture with the two cameras at the same time. They're perfectly synchronized. With that camera, we've got an infrared light. The infrared light bounces off the reflective dot and then essentially allows us to track it. So it's creating the visually simplest way of being able to understand movement that we possibly can. We'll then use the software to track those markers that we can then turn into joint angles, speeds, distances, and we can track that performance over time. What we're seeing on the screen is essentially a kind of a black and white image of Dimitri's movements, but what we're really interested in is the markers. We're particularly interested in the representation of the sword that comes from the hand and interested in the ones that are on his torso to see kind of how his body moves versus how his hand moves. So we're able to kind of compare and contrast how those movements happen. We're moving now on to 3D capture. So what this allows us to do is to examine everything in a bit more detail. So we're going to put some of these on you. These are IMUs, that stands for Inertial Measurement Unit. So essentially what these are measuring is acceleration, rotational speed, and the magnetic interference. This time we're using kit that calibrates the athlete rather than calibrating the space. So previously we had the cameras and we looked at calibrating the space using known distances. This time we've got systems whereby we tell it that Ollie is in a certain position and then we're able to use that information to understand how he moves. And the software does all of the hard work for us and is able to just provide us straight away with joint angles, with segment orientations, with any of the data we're interested in. The challenge there is that because we captured the athlete, not the space, is that things like speed and distance in space are harder to capture.
Back, boom, and now boom. Yeah. Back, boom.
We were looking with Ollie about actually when he makes a lunge from a different position, so he's not got full use of both of his legs, so actually is he more stable when he's over his fully working leg, or actually how does that change? So we can look at not just the pressure distribution of that, but actually does some of the movement parameters of his upper body change when he starts his acceleration at a different place.
One of the things that cropped up that showed was where I had a perceived change of distance from a certain way that I lunged. I realised it wasn't that much, so I realised maybe some of the problems I had were a bit more psychological. For a sport that is as equipment heavy as wheelchair fencing, I definitely think it could be a massive part to play in the future of the sport's development.
The BBC was always on in the Mashiri house, and my dream actually was to be a BBC News presenter. I want to be for others what the BBC was for us, a trusted source of stability and hope. For me, trust is about presence, about fostering relationships all around the world over years. So when a story breaks, we're not chasing a lead, we're already there. I'm Marianne Mashiri on The World Today for BBC News.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Ukraine's President Zelensky says his US and European allies are united in one voice and one mission ahead of Friday's US-Russia summit in Alaska.
Everything regarding Ukraine needs to be discussed with Ukraine. We have to be part of this conversation.
We'll be speaking live with the former Prime Minister of Sweden, Carl Bildt. We'll also have the latest from our correspondents in Berlin, Washington and Westminster. Our other headlines: after last summer's riots in the UK, police forces will now be encouraged to disclose the ethnicity and nationality of suspects in sensitive cases. Intense air attacks on Gaza continue as Israel's Prime Minister pushes on with his plan to seize the north of the territory. And wildfires continue to rage in Spain, Portugal, France and Italy as the summer heatwave continues to sweep across the continent. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. Ukraine's President Zelensky says the United States is ready to support his country ahead of Friday's US-Russia summit in Alaska. He was speaking after a virtual meeting with President Trump and European allies, during which he warned that Vladimir Putin was bluffing about wanting to end the war. Well, at a news conference in Berlin, President Zelensky insisted Ukraine must also be at the heart of any negotiations about its future.
Everything regarding Ukraine needs to be discussed with Ukraine. We have to be part of this conversation. First of all, it's ceasefire, security guarantees we need to know. By the way, President Trump has supported us today and US is ready to support us. Second, Russia doesn't have any veto rights for Ukraine members in any alliances. Third are sanctions and increasing sanctions on Russia if they are not agreeing to cease fire.
Well, that was President Zelensky in the news conference after that meeting. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondents in Westminster and Washington. First, though, here's our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse.
Press conference after their summit with Donald Trump. The tone was serious, but they were keen to stress that there was a positive outcome. They listed a number of principles they say Donald Trump agreed to, including not negotiating on behalf of the Europeans and Ukraine. They say he agreed to the current front lines being the starting point of any negotiation, and they claim, he said, Ukraine would be able to defend itself in the long-term future. I tried to ask Mr. Zelensky whether he was going to make the trip to Alaska on the off chance. He sort of shrugged his shoulders and laughed, but the official message is no. But you really get a sense of what was at stake there. They clearly wanted to put on a united front, a single message to say, do not go over our heads. You need our backing for any kind of ceasefire. But of course, there is never the guarantee that Donald Trump might go into this Putin meeting and start repeating, as his other representatives have done, repeating Russian.
James Waterhouse in Berlin. Now, we were showing you Donald Trump at the Kennedy Center. He's actually started taking questions from journalists, so let's listen in.
12 months when these factories are open, we're opening up factories all over the world, all over the country, but that's all spreading to, I think we're spreading the wealth all over the world, if you want to know the truth. but we're opening them in this country at a level that we've never seen before. We've never seen. So they just don't want to prove anything. They just, we meet with them and they say, as Nancy Reagan said, just say no. They go, just say no. They're afraid to approve anything. If we say, we want to stop crime in this country, or as an example, bail, we want to make it so that people, if they murder somebody, they're in jail. They don't get out on no bail. They say, we don't want that. We want people to murder somebody and they immediately are released and they go out and murder somebody else. It's a big problem, a tremendous problem. By the way, we're going to go for statutes in D.C. and then ultimately for the rest of the country where that's not going to be allowed. Because it was when they did the cashless bail thing that the numbers really started going up. In this city, in New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, no matter where they have it, the numbers went through the roof. So we're going to meet with them, of course. I'd like to meet with them. We're going to tell them all these good things, and they're going to tell us no. And then we're going to go out and we're going to vote it in by the Republicans, because I don't believe that anybody is capable of making a deal with these people. They have gone crazy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Your federalization of the police has a 30-day limit unless Congress acts to extend it. Are you talking to Congress about extending it, or do you believe 30 days is sufficient?
Well, if it's a
Well, Donald Trump
emergency,
taking some questions there about domestic issues. Of course, we heard that announcement about the National Guard in Washington earlier in the week. We'll continue to monitor the questions because we want to concentrate on the story of the day, that European meeting, the conversations with Donald Trump. And we've heard in the last hour from Sir Keir Starmer, who was chairing today's meeting of those European leaders. He said the UK's support for Ukraine is unwavering and added that international borders must not be changed by force.
We stand ready as a coalition to support the meeting on Friday and everything that I hope can flow out of it. Nothing is obviously guaranteed, and as Emmanuel has said and Friedrich has said, the President has agreed to debrief immediately afterwards so that we know what the next steps will be. But we're ready to support this, including through the plans that we've already drawn up to deploy a reassurance force once hostilities have ceased.
Well, that was Keir Starmer. Let's go to Westminster, speak to our political correspondent, Harry Farley. And Harry, tell me a little more about what Number 10 is saying about today's meeting.
Well, this afternoon, Matthew, we've seen a coordinated and determined diplomatic effort playing out in real time, and that effort aimed at making sure that Ukraine's perspective, Europe's perspective is heard by Donald Trump, and not actually heard, not just heard, but actually ringing in his ears ahead of that meeting with Vladimir Putin, with President Putin on Friday. Out of those European leaders, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is seen as the one who is closest to Donald Trump, has the best relationship with him. And really, I think this is a bit of a test for that relationship. Can Keir Starmer, along with the other European allies, influence him, use that relationship to try and bring him round to their line of thinking? And I think we see in a Downing Street statement that they've released in the last couple of hours, that tightrope that we've seen so often with European allies and their relationship with Donald Trump's White House, that tightrope between, on the one hand, going out of their way to thank him, to praise him, to not want to irritate him, but then on the other hand, reiterating their differences. And that statement from Downing Street saying that the European leaders thanked President Trump for his efforts in bringing Putin to the table in pursuit of a ceasefire. But then it goes on to say the Prime Minister was clear in his support for Ukraine is as unwavering. And he went on that international borders must not be changed by force, and Ukraine must have a robust and credible security guarantee to defend its territory. So I suppose that re-emphasis, I suppose, of those positions that we've heard many times before, but particularly when it comes so close to that meeting on Friday, it really highlights the differences in the two sides' positions.
Harry, thanks for that update there at Westminster. Those pictures that you're seeing on the screen of Donald Trump, he's still taking questions, still talking about crime in Washington, D.C. So we'll go there if he is asked about the war in Ukraine and the summit on Friday. But let's speak live on the programme to Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister of Sweden. And thank you so much, Carl, for being here on the programme. Just how important do you think today's meeting of those European leaders is, given all those worries about being sidelined for Friday?
I think it was very important, and I think the meetings that you've seen occurring during the last few days among different constellations of European leaders have been very important in reinforcing the unity that is there in Europe. And then being able to present it directly to President Trump was, of course, obviously also important. And underlining, without flattering him too much, by the way, that there is basic European support for trying to close down the war, to have a ceasefire, and to make that the priority, close down the war, and then begin the difficult paths towards peace, and then doing that on the basis of the principles that the Europeans have elaborated. So I think it looks like it's been a successful endeavor. Whether it's going to have any impact whatsoever on Friday, that's another issue.
You paused before you said that's another issue. Let's talk about your concerns. I was talking to a former American ambassador who made the point we can't just have him and Witkoff winging it in that meeting. They just don't know enough. And in terms of just where we are, with Putin being a master of muddying the waters, are those some of the concerns you also have?
Most certainly, if you see on the record that we've seen since January, it's been, I think, amazingly amateurish, the way it's been handled on the American side, with virtually no one with an experience from dealing with Russia on the table or even around the table. While Mr. Putin has been around for some time, to put it very, very mildly. So here you have an extremely professional, dedicated, single-minded individual, because this is the issue for President Putin, up against a slightly uncoordinated crowd that doesn't seem to have any coherent strategy. And that's why I think also these European messages are very important, to try to give some principles and give some coherence to the American position, if possible.
In terms of how you would get to a ceasefire and a lasting peace, where are you on territory? Because that has been talked about enormously, especially in the last few days, with conflicting, confusing things from Donald Trump talking about territory swaps, and we know what Ukraine's position is. Where are you on that? Can you see a landing zone on that? Briefly, Carl Bildt.
I can't see the landing zone today, but I think I can see a starting zone. And the starting zone is, of course, a ceasefire. A ceasefire always throughout history is that you cease firing where you are at the moment.
Carl, I'm going to come back to you, and apologies for that, but Donald Trump just talking about the call with European leaders.
Which is trillions of dollars in defense capability. No, it was always going to be, I was going to meet with President Putin, and then after that, I'm going to call the leaders and President Zelensky. I'm going to call President Zelensky, and then I'll call, probably in that order, the leaders. There's a very good chance that we're going to have a second meeting, which will be more productive than the first, because the first is I'm going to find out where we are and what we're doing. Again, this is Biden's war. This isn't my war. He got us into this thing, and it should have never happened. This war would have never happened if I were president. But it is what it is, and I'm here to fix it, and I'm here to stop 6,000, 7,000 people last week. 7,213 people last week were killed, mostly soldiers. But missiles being lobbed into towns don't exactly help either, but mostly soldiers. And Ukrainian and Russian, they're not American soldiers, but if we can save a lot of lives, it would be a great thing. I've stopped 5 wars in the last 6 months. And on top of that, we wiped out the nuclear capability of Iran, obliterated it. It's turned out to be a correct word, by the way, because some of the press said, well, maybe it wasn't obliteration. It was obliteration. And we're going to meet with, I would say, the second meeting. If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately. And we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself, if they'd like to have me there. And that would be a meeting where maybe it could be absolutely work. But the first meeting will not work that out. Certain great things can be gained in the first. It's going to be a very important meeting. But it's setting the table for the second meeting. I think the second meeting, if the second meeting takes place. Now, there may be no second meeting, because if I feel that it's not appropriate to have it because I didn't get the answers that we have to have, then we're not going to have a second meeting.
you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I didn't ask you. Go ahead, please, Regis.
I just wanted to ask you, thank you, Mr. President. How involved were you in the selection process of these honorees?
I would say I was about 98% involved. No, they all went through me. They came over, Rick and Sergio and everybody.
Well, it goes back to talking about why he's there at the Kennedy Center. So let's bring Carl Bildt back in. And Carl, just before I ask you a question, that was really significant what we just heard, because Donald Trump talking about a good call with European leaders, talking about a first meeting. He would gauge where Vladimir Putin was, but then saying if it went well, talking about a three-way meeting potentially with Putin himself and Zelensky all there at the room. What was your reading of that?
That was clearly news, and that might be significant. That remains to be seen. That is a meeting that I'm quite certain Mr. Putin does not want to see, because he would then fear that he will be under combined pressure from Trump and Zelensky to have a ceasefire, which is one of the things that he's distinctly against at the moment. So he will do quite a number of different maneuvers to get out of that particular approach. Whether he succeeds with that remains to be seen. I think from just a quick reaction, I think a lot of the first meeting will probably be spent by Mr. Putin trying to deflect the momentum towards a meeting with Zelensky. He is not interested in ceasefire at the moment. He is not interested in a meeting with Zelensky at this time.
If somehow Donald Trump gets into that orbit and there's some sort of Putin solution that he goes away with, and of course it crosses various Ukrainian red lines, take me through then the dilemmas for both President Zelensky and Europe.
Well, then we are in a sort of Munich 2.0 scenario, where President Trump and President Putin would agree to something and then try to force Ukrainian to accept it. Then what's going to happen then is very much up to the Europeans, because the position of Ukraine will be dependent upon their perception of the support that Europe is prepared to give them long term. And that's really going to be the critical issue. And frankly speaking, without having the Europeans agree, reluctantly or whatever, any such Trump-Putin deal is unlikely to work. I mean, it is not 1938.
Really briefly, do you think it's time, if we got to that scenario, it is high time for the Americans to actually put in place all those threats of sanctions that have been talked about?
Well, most certainly. I mean, what is needed in order to get a ceasefire is first to put pressure on Mr. Putin, and Mr. Trump has been very reluctant to do that. But secondly, even more important, to give support to the Ukrainians. And the brutal fact is, of course, that Trump has been cutting back on virtually all of the military support so far. And it's military and support for Ukraine in other terms that is really the thing that could affect the outcome, and really the thing that impacts upon Mr. Putin.
Well, Carl Bildt, it's always great to have you on the programme, so thanks so much for joining us, giving us that snapshot assessment of what we're hearing from Donald Trump. You can see there on the screen he is still taking questions there at the Kennedy Center. If he returns to today's main story, the Ukraine story, will obviously also return to Washington. But around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. We're going to take a short break. Welcome back to Verified Live, and President Trump is still speaking at the Kennedy Center in Washington, still taking questions. As I say, if he returns to the war on Ukraine and the summit on Friday, we'll return and hear a little more of his answers. But a little earlier in the week, Donald Trump caused alarm among Ukraine's allies when he started talking about territory swaps. Well, here's our correspondent Paul Adams on what exactly that might mean in practice.
The Alaska summit, Donald Trump's first face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin for 6 years, is a big moment, but it's also one fraught with risk. Let's look at who controls what in Ukraine and what might be at stake in any peace agreement. We need to go back to 2014 to see Vladimir Putin's first move, the occupation and annexation of Crimea. That was followed by a Moscow-backed separatist movement in the area known as the Donbass, specifically the two regions or oblasts known as Donetsk and Luhansk. A war simmered there for 8 years. But in February 2022, Putin launched his full-scale invasion. Russian troops reached the outskirts of Kiev and seized huge swathes of the south, including big chunks of two more oblasts, Zaporizhia and Kherson. The war has ebbed and flowed ever since. Russia now controls around 20% of Ukraine. In the east, Russian forces are advancing, but very slowly and at great cost. President Zelensky says that what's needed now is an unconditional ceasefire. But in the run-up to his Alaska summit with Putin, President Trump has started talking instead about territorial swaps, causing shockwaves in Kiev and across Europe. But what could these swaps mean, given that all the territory in question legally belongs to Ukraine? Let's look at the Donbass. Some reports suggest that Mr. Putin is demanding that Ukraine hand over the remaining territory it controls in both oblasts. But that would mean Kiev giving up on places which tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have died trying to protect. For Kiev, such a concession would represent a bitter pill. Ukraine's leader, President Zelensky, says Ukraine will not leave the Donbass. What about Zaporizhia and Kherson? Here, it's reported Russia is offering to halt its offensive and freeze the lines. But would Moscow be prepared to give any of it back? It seems unlikely. This is all part of Vladimir Putin's strategically vital land bridge connecting Russia to occupied Crimea. Putin regards all these places as part of Russia. For Ukraine and Europe, territorial swaps at this very early stage are a non-starter. A discussion about future borders may eventually come, but only when the war has stopped and Ukraine's future security has been guaranteed.
Well, that was our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. Let me bring in our North America correspondent, Arunade Mukherjee, there in Washington. And Arunade, having listened to Donald Trump answering one of those recent questions, talking about making a quick assessment on Friday, see if Putin answered his questions. If they do, he was talking about perhaps quickly moving to a second meeting, including President Zelensky, but also saying in the last few moments Russia would face consequences if the war was not stopped. So very clearly, it appears we are reaching a fork in the road.
Well, interesting, yes, and for the first time, sort of, in a greater detail, you had President Trump spelling out what the sequence is likely to be, what we're likely to see. He talked about that first meeting where, he's essentially sort of lowering expectations in that sense, saying that this is just going to be just to feel what the situation is, what does Vladimir Putin really want, and then quickly talking about that potential of a second meeting that could take place, which he in his own words said would be a little more productive. And that meeting significantly also said it could also involve President Zelensky as well as President Putin, talking about a trilateral meeting if they would want Donald Trump to be present there as well. But again, that's still a bit into the future. I think the first hurdle would be how this first meeting goes, given the fact now that Donald Trump is further armed based on today's meeting with the European leaders and the Ukrainian president, that virtual meeting that took place. He's further armed with some of those non-negotiables that have been communicated to him by the European leaders, saying that, look, we're not part of this meeting, but these are our red lines. These cannot be crossed. And this is something you need to take forward with Vladimir Putin when you meet him. So interestingly, when now Donald Trump is talking about, he's not talked about, swapping of territories at the moment. He's simply talking about, look, I'm going to go and see what Vladimir Putin wants. I'm going to see and gauge the mood. And, even earlier on, the U.S. ambassador to NATO was speaking to Fox News And he mentioned that, look, there is a lot of urgency, yes, but it's not something that we can expect to sort of, end within one night. So that kind of context is also important. So placing a lot of significance on this first meeting, saying that we'll first gauge, scout, and see what exactly Vladimir Putin wants, and how serious really is he. So both leaders need to establish that base of trust based on which then they can proceed further, because Donald Trump, in his own words, has repeatedly said in the past he's had phone calls with Vladimir Putin where he thought that things were turning optimistic, but then he said, Vladimir Putin goes ahead and bombs territories in Ukraine, and then we're back to square one. So it's the disappointments of the past which is also sort of playing a part over here. But again, urgency is that big word that I would use to summarize how the Trump administration has been feeling. Look, this is one war, and Donald Trump, again, as you heard in that address, while talking about his attempts at mediating between Russia and Ukraine, he immediately talked about the wars that he has stopped. That has been his constant communication and message. Whenever he's spoken about this, look, I'm the world leader who's able to get things done. But this has been one thing that has certainly made him impatient over the last few months, even frustrated, where he's expressed that frustration in these various press interactions. So he certainly would like to see this go over the line. But the worry from Europe and Ukraine is, in that spirit of urgency, there shouldn't be promises or concessions which would be detrimental to Ukraine.
Arunade, stay there. I will come back to you in a moment, but we are about to have viewers around the world leave us on this section of the programme. Worth just recapping, because as Arunade was saying, that Donald Trump saying if that first meeting goes well, he will look for a second meeting, including President Zelensky. Sources familiar with this saying to Reuters that they're looking potentially for locations, but also adding in the last little while Russia would face consequences if the war was not stopped. Donald Trump continues to answer questions, and we will continue to monitor that live here on BBC News.
But other than that, I think he's doing a very good job, yes.
Now on BBC News, the biggest African and international news stories. Focus on Africa.
Joining you from Nairobi, this is Focus on Africa on BBC News. Our stories today: Cape Verde declares a state of emergency after a deadly tropical storm kills at least 9 people. The US sanctions a Congolese armed group linked to violence and illegal mining in the east of the DRC.
One of the intents of the sanctions is to push these processes forward by making clear that the US government is serious about the peace process and about getting access to Congolese minerals through the peace process.
Also in the program, a decades-long wait. Over half a century on, France's president acknowledges the violence committed by his country's troops during Cameroon's battle for independence. And in Tanzania, political fundraising is under the spotlight as the ruling party receives over $30 million in donations ahead of October's elections.
There are sources which are unknown, like the businessmen who want influence after the ruling party has won.
Many thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa. I'm Rhoda Odhiambo. Now we start today's show in the West African island nation of Cape Verde, where a state of emergency was declared overnight on 2 of the country's 10 islands. That's after both São Vicente and Santo Antão were hit by a tropical storm on Monday, which caused devastating flash flooding. São Vicente was particularly badly hit, with more rain falling on the island in 2 hours than it normally receives in an entire year. At least 9 people have died, with more than 1,500 others displaced, while many thousands more are injured. Now, the country is in an official state of mourning, even as rescue operations continue at pace. Meanwhile, the Cape Verdean diaspora, which is largely based in Portugal, Luxembourg, the United States, and France, has launched urgent crowdfunding campaigns to support both flood victims by providing food, water, and various emergency supplies. Now, the storm has since moved on from Cape Verde, but for the latest, we can cross live to the BBC's Nicolas Negos, who has been following the story from Abidjan. Many thanks for joining us on the program, Nicolas. So what's the latest from these 2 islands?
Well, Rhoda, is the second day of mourning in Cape Verde, and the situation over there remains very critical following the deadly flood that struck the archipelago earlier this week. São Vicente has been, as you said, the hardest hit, with at least 9 confirmed deaths, 7 due to flash floods, and 1 by electrocution, according to the authorities. Rescue operations are ongoing on the 2 islands, São Vicente and Santo Antão, which is located at 1 hour by ferry. And since now it's very difficult for people to be able to access to water because there is a huge disruption in terms of water and also food. I spoke to earlier to the singer Fatou Diakité that I've met in 2021 in São Vicente when I was covering the presidential election. And she explained to me that her, with other artists, were trying to cook to help people who have lost everything. She shared the story of a young teenager who has lost her leg, and that it was very difficult for rescue operations to reach to their home. So the situation is very difficult in both islands.
If we look at how you've described the situation in both of these islands, but how easy it is for rescue teams to be able to support them, for instance, would the support coming from neighboring islands or from the capital city in Praia, which is in Santiago, I believe, a few kilometers from these 2 islands? Nicolas, can you hear me?
Yes, so first of all, the Cape Verdean government has activated the National Emergency Fund to try to find immediate support for those affected in Saint-Anton and also in Saint Vincent. And the diaspora, which is very strong, only 500,000 inhabitants live in Cape Verde. And you have at least 1 million Cape Verdeans living abroad. And they're trying to mobilize themselves, especially for GoFundMe, to try to find support to help those who have been affected by the flood. I spoke with Andrea Levy. She is the president of the association Hello Cabo Verde, based in Paris, and she was telling me that they gathered already more than 40,000 euros to pay food and equipment that they will bring themselves in Saint Vincent to help those affected by the floods.
And if we look at the support that's coming from the diaspora, how much of a difference will it make, together with the support being offered by the humanitarian organizations as well as the government?
I think that's really important when you look at as important as the tragedy is, that the authorities and also the diaspora come together to help the victims of the tropical storm Erin.
All right, many thanks for joining us, Nicolas. We seem to have lost you there due to the internet connection, but we'll keep you updated on that story. Now, the United States has imposed sanctions on groups accused of profiting from conflict minerals in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Treasury Department says a militia known as Pareco FF controlled lucrative coltan mines in Rubaya between 2022 and 2024, along with the Congolese mining company CDMC and 2 China-based exporters. The group is accused of smuggling minerals into global markets. Rubaya, now in the hands of the M23 rebel group, produces around 15% of the world's coltan. The sanctions come amid recent fighting between the Congolese army and the M23 rebels, despite the peace deal both signed last month. Now, the leader of Pareco FF, Sendego Museveni, told the BBC that the US has mistaken his group's identity with that of a group simply called Pareco. Pareco, with no FF at the end, is a militia formed in 2007 as a coalition of various groups in North Kivu region. Over the years, Pareco became known for shifting alliances, including occasional cooperation with the Congolese army. The splinter Pareco FF group, meanwhile, emerged 3 years ago, with the US saying it funds its operations through labor, extortion, crucial mineral smuggling. The mining company CDMC is said to act as the conduit exporting the minerals. However, Museveni denies that Pareco FF has ever set foot in Rubaya. Now, earlier on, I spoke to Professor Jackson Stearns, who is a political scientist.
Well, Pareco is one of 100 or so armed groups in the eastern DRC. It's existed around 15 or 18 years now. There are several different factions of Pareco. It's a local armed group that has several factions, and each of the factions has its own set of alliances. The Pareco FF group is a group that has been active in illegal mining or in the illegal taxation of artisanal mining around one of the key mining sites in the eastern Congo. It's called the Rubaya mine, which is potentially one of the largest tantalum mines in the world. And it's because of that role in the taxation and occupation of this mine in the past that Pareco has been sanctioned by the United States. Neither of these factions are currently in control of the Rubaya mine. Since last year, it's been controlled by the M23 armed group that's backed by the Rwandan government.
And how significant are these sanctions now, and how would they affect the supply of the minerals that you've talked about, such as coltan, for instance?
Some of the speculation, certainly my feeling about these sanctions, is that one of the intents is to allow American companies, industrial companies, to get access to these mining sites. And so by sanctioning groups, companies that are involved in existing supply chains, it could make way for the industrial investments that have already been put on the table. The peace deal explicitly says that American economic investments should be at the heart of this deal. And so that could be where this is headed.
What does this mean for the broader peace process in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo?
these peace processes are moving forward now, I would say slowly. And I think one of the intents of the sanctions is to push these processes forward by making clear that the U.S. government is serious about the peace process and about getting access to Congolese minerals through the peace process. And so therefore, there needs to be a change in economic arrangements on the ground. The people who were making money there before can no longer be making money the way they were doing so in the past. And so my feeling is that this is all part of a same process intended to push the peace process forward. That's great for the citizens of the Eastern DRC if that actually works out, but at the same time give U.S. economic interests under the America First policy of Donald Trump access to Congolese minerals. That's, I think, the logic of the peace process. There are many, many pitfalls. There are many ways this could go wrong, but that's sort of where we stand now. I think the next step in the peace process is that for the talks between the Congolese government and the M23 to solidify.
And what would happen if these sanctions are violated?
Well, the sanctions actually are sanctions by the U.S. government are quite consequential compared to UN sanctions or even EU sanctions. And that's because the world economy is still a dollar-based economy. That means U.S. imposing sanctions on these companies and on these groups, especially the companies, because companies need to get access to credit markets. They need to get access to loans. They need to be able to ship goods across international borders. For most of those transactions today, they need access to dollar markets, and that is no longer possible for them. And so placing these companies under U.S. sanctions could spell the end of those companies. It certainly has done so for other companies in the past. And so it's not really a question about what happens if they break these sanctions. These sanctions themselves will be extremely consequential for those companies involved. And so, you know, those same individuals behind those companies could create new companies, but it certainly is going to be an impediment to the functioning of those companies.
That's Professor Jason Stearns giving us a perspective on the U.S. sanctions issued to this Congolese armed group. You're watching Focus on Africa on BBC News, and here's what's still to come on the program. Raising funds and questions, we take a closer look at how political parties, including the ruling governmental one in Tanzania, use fundraising for both their political campaigns. Welcome back to Focus on Africa. To Cameroon now, where more than half a century on from its independence, French President Emmanuel Macron has acknowledged the violence committed by his country's forces during and after the Central African nation's struggle for liberation. The formal letter acknowledgement addressed to Cameroon's President Paul Biya came after a joint report by French and Cameroonian historians examining France's suppression of Cameroonian independence movements from 1945 1945 to 1971, which claimed tens of thousands of lives. However, the French leader fell short of offering a clear apology or addressing the calls for reparations for the atrocities committed by France's troops in its former colony. Professor Willibrod Zengwa is a Cameroonian historian who worked on this report and gave us more details about the role that historians played in this investigation.
Our role was to establish the facts and figures after having gone through the archival documents put at our disposal. As historians, we just established the facts and figures and apportioned the blames where the blame should have gone to. And the French government, which received a huge portion of the blame, has officially acknowledged it through President Macron. I think that is the most important, from the evolution to the acceptance. And it was not our role to recommend apologies. Of course, let us note that it might be a subtle way of apologizing by saying that the two governments should put up a commission to continue talking. It is during this period of talking and doing further research that we think that the politicians, the two governments, will come out with what should be done. Should there be a formal apology? Should there be reparation? Reparations only come after judgment has been passed. And we did not go to the field as historians, as judges to pass, as a law court to pass judgment and condemn, to recommend reparation. We went to the field, I've said that over and over, to establish facts and figures. We know almost exactly about how many people were killed.
We can now speak live to our correspondent, Paul G., who joins us from the capital, Yaoundé. Many thanks for joining us on the program, Paul. So what's been the reaction by Cameroonians to this report and the comments made by French President Emmanuel Macron?
Hi, Rhoda. Well, Cameroonians have been very blunt in their response to President Macron's acknowledgement that French troops did indeed commit atrocities during the independence, the quest for independence, and even after that. They have said that the French president fell short of apologizing to the Cameroonian people. And to them, this was something that should not have happened because the atrocities left, a great toll on the Cameroonian people, and as such, an apology was the slightest thing to do. But then, as the historian did say, their job was not to recommend that apology. But most of the people who've spoken to say that if there is no apology, then the talk of reparation should be on the table.
Now, this report is something that historians were gathering for a long period of time. What else were they able to gather in it, if you can share with us? Paul, are you able to hear me? Well, we seem to have some technical challenges with Paul G. We'll get back to him once the technical hitches get sorted. And finally, today, we are looking at funding for political parties. This comes after the ruling Chama cha Mapinduzi, or CCM party in Tanzania, recently raised in excess of $30 million as it looks to finance its campaign for October's general election. Meanwhile, those parties in opposition, and particularly CCM's main challengers, Chadema, appear to be operating on much leaner budgets with far less visibility in terms of donor backing. Now, CCM recently hosted a high-profile fundraising gala in the capital, Dodoma, yet there is little public information about how the funds will either be tracked, audited or spent. Now, earlier on, I spoke to Dr. Anna Henga, who is a lawyer and a political analyst, and she explained what the rules in Tanzania are about fundraising for campaigns.
In 2010, Tanzania enacted the Election Expenses Act. This law governs fundraising, governs how you spend your money from as a politician, from nomination to campaigns during elections, up to the end of the election.
Does the law give criteria of who is supposed to donate to campaigns, for instance?
What the law says is you should, a political party rather, should specify who is the funder, an amount of the funding, and it gives 7 days prior to the nomination.
And is this the first time that the campaign for the ruling party, CCM, the funding rather, has been made public, and what is it that they aim to achieve in this?
What I've seen this time is that they are now fundraising from individuals, like openly. In the past, they used to fundraise from corporates, from businessmen in country and outside. It might be more open now because the government of Tanzania especially said they will not fundraise from external.
And why do you think they decided to switch their strategy from looking for funding from corporates, but now looking for campaign funds from individuals, like you've said?
Yeah, maybe because their opponents were doing this strategy. They had something in Swahili called tone tone, like a drop of something. So they were fundraising from individuals. But also, I think this election will be super expensive, and it won't have any external donation because of what happened. You know, like the main ruling party, main opposition party, Chadema, they have boycotted the election, said they want an independent electoral commission. They want changes first. Changes of the law before the election. They say no reform, no election. So I doubt whether external sources, external funders will be willing to give them funding.
And there are several African countries that are still gearing up towards the election. But I want to understand from you as a political analyst, why do you think it's crucial for countries gearing up towards an election, especially political parties, to be able to be open about where they're getting their sources of finances when it comes to campaigning?
All Africans, except Tanzania, most of them are part of the African Charter on Election and Democracy and Governance. And that charter provides for transparent elections, transparent fundraising, and also to citizens to know what has been used as expenses in the election. But in most of the African countries, that is not a practice, especially in the ruling parties. You find they've overspent what they said they would spend, and also there are sources which are unknown, like the businessmen who want influence after the ruling party has won. The problem also is not just having the law, is implementing the law. Like in Tanzania, we have a very good law, but it is not being implemented even at 20% of it.
Let's go back to Cameroon and speak to the BBC's Paul Njie, who was giving us an update on French President Emmanuel Macron acknowledging the violence that his country's troops committed during Cameroon's struggle for independence. And Paul, you were about to tell us just what other points were included in this report that were conducted by historians both in Cameroon and France.
Yes, so the commission did find that French troops colluded with Cameroonian forces at the time, to target some persons in the country. And of course, they also cited that Macron should acknowledge the role that the French troops conducted in the assassination or in the killing of some independence icons, including the iconic leader Ruben Om-Nyobe. So those are some of the things that were in that report. And as I was saying a little earlier, the reaction from here has been blunt, and people believe that it's high time that France started talking about reparation.
So what does this mean for the relationship between Cameroon and France going forward?
I would say it's going to be a mixed kind of relation, because on the one hand, there are those who say that this report, would start quelling some of the tensions that have been there between Cameroon and France as it pertained to the historical essence of what France did in Cameroon. But then there are others who say that we cannot turn a blind eye to what has happened. This acknowledgement means that Cameroonian authorities need to take a very firm stance against France, especially because people had already known that these atrocities were happening, but the French government in the past years did not acknowledge.
And is it clear why President Emmanuel Macron decided to acknowledge these acts right now, yet they happened many, many, many years ago?
Yeah, it came after pressure from different quarters that this needs to be a recognition from France. And when he visited Cameroon in 2022, that conversation came up, and he did say that Cameroon and France were going to put up a joint commission of historians to look into the archives and, of course, tell the world the truth that happened. And, of course, what we are seeing today is his admission that indeed the historians were right to say that France waged a violent war against Cameroonian independence movements when they were seeking, independence or decolonization.
Well, the historians who conducted this report have not recommended whether reparations should be made or whether an apology should be done. But what's the conversation right now between government quarters and also the historians? They are now moving forward with this report having been made public, and the letter was signed about 1 month ago.
Yes, so there is more space or room for more research to be done by the historians, but then the Cameroonian government as at yet is still to respond to President Macron's letter to Paul Biya. A source from the communication ministry tells me that the Cameroonian government should be responding to that anytime from now. But the conversation here is really one of, there's no surprise. Okay. People had already known this, so they feel that the historians were going to formalize this history that had already been known. But the historians also believe that the report and acknowledgement by Macron is a vindication because many people felt that the historians were just going to be paid to do whatever they could do or to back both governments.
Paul, we have to wrap it up there. Many thanks for joining us on the program. That's all the time we had for you today on Focus on Africa. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thousands of people have come here to the centre of Seoul this evening. They have come to celebrate the newly elected president, Lee Jae-myung.
He's been firing rubber bullets at the direction of the crowd, and it shows you just how volatile the situation is.
We're seeing scenes of destruction like this one across Mandalay, and the reality on the ground is there just aren't enough pairs of hands.
Given the scale of the attacks we've seen over the past 48 hours, it doesn't feel like we're in ceasefire territory.
There when the story breaks, BBC News.
It's 6 p.m. in London. This is The World Today with Mariam Mashiri. Ukraine's President Zelensky says he feels positive after he and European allies spoke to Donald Trump ahead of the US-Russia summit in Alaska. Intense air attacks on Gaza as Israel's Prime Minister pushes on with his plan to seize the north of the territory. Wildfires continue to rage in Spain, Portugal, France and Italy as a summer heat wave sweeps across the continent. Also coming up on The World Today.
And in sport, can Tottenham Hotspur pick up their second trophy in 3 months? Fans descending on Udine in Italy for the UEFA Super Cup as Spurs take on PSG.
Hello and welcome to The World Today on BBC News. Ukraine's President Zelensky says the US is ready to support us following a call with Donald Trump and European leaders. The talks in Berlin come ahead of Friday's Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. They've been hosted by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and chaired by the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Well, Moscow has dismissed the European diplomatic initiative as insignificant. But speaking in Berlin, President Zelensky said Ukraine must also be at the heart of any negotiations about its future.
Everything regarding Ukraine needs to be discussed with Ukraine. We have to be part of this conversation. First of all, is ceasefire, security guarantees we need to know. By the way, President Trump has supported us today and US is ready to support us. Second, Russia doesn't have any veto rights for Ukraine members in any alliances. Third are sanctions and increasing sanctions on Russia if they are not agreeing to ceasefire.
Well, in his first comments, President Trump said it had been a very good call. He said that if his talks with Mr. Putin in Alaska went well, there would be a second meeting that would involve President Zelensky of Ukraine.
If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately. And we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself if they'd like to have me there. And that would be a meeting where maybe it could be absolutely work. But the first meeting will not work that out. Certain great things can be gained in the first. It's going to be a very important meeting. But it's setting the table for the second meeting. I think the second meeting, if the second meeting takes place, now there may be no second meeting because if I feel that it's not appropriate to have it because I didn't get the answers that we have to have, then we're not going to have a second meeting.
Well, Donald Trump says there will be very severe consequences if Putin doesn't agree to end the war with Ukraine after Friday's summit in Alaska. And asked by a journalist whether he would convince Putin to stop targeting civilians in Ukraine, this is what President Trump said.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've had that conversation with him. I've had a lot of good conversations with him. Then I go home and I see that a rocket hit a nursing home or a rocket hit an apartment building and people are laying dead in the street. So I guess the answer to that is no, because I've had this conversation. I want to end the war. It's Biden's war, but I want to end it. I'll be very proud to end this war along with the 5 other wars I ended. But I guess the answer to that is probably no.
Let's cross live to Washington and our North America correspondent Irunide Mukherjee. And Irunide, what do you make of the way in which Mr. Trump is now talking about the meeting on Friday, having spoken to European leaders and Mr. Zelensky? A change in tone now.
Well, certainly that's how it is going to be read. From going about talking on swapping of territories to now talking about having a good meeting with European leaders, and also at the end of it saying that, look, if I'm not happy with that first meeting, there are going to be severe consequences. We all know that 8th of August was that last deadline by Donald Trump, who had asked Russia to agree to a ceasefire agreement by the 8th of August. If not, there would be severe sanctions and secondary tariffs on countries doing business with Russia. That kind of went, out of the radar and was overshadowed by the talks of the conversations that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will have on Friday. So clearly making that announcement today that, look, that is still very much on the table if it doesn't go in the way in which he would have hoped. And this would certainly give some sort of optimism to European leaders and the Ukrainian president, who've been a fair bit concerned, ever since Donald Trump made those remarks talking about those swapping of territories, which is why you had that united European front today, having those conversations with Donald Trump, putting forth what they believe will be red lines, will not be non-negotiables in front of Donald Trump as he heads into that meeting with Vladimir Putin. Now, sequentially after that, you had Donald Trump come out saying, I've had a very good meeting, and also talking tough as well at times, saying that, look, I need to have the answers that I would like to hear. And also, significantly, Miriam, reminding a lot of people how in the past they felt that they've come close to ceasefire agreements, to possible peace scenarios. But again, he's been disappointed because, again, he puts the blame on Vladimir Putin, saying, you have Russia going ahead and bombing areas of Ukraine. So very interesting statements just a day before he's set to meet the Russian president.
Really interesting as well, the way in which Mr. Trump, Runade, talked about how many wars that he has ended in his time as president this time round. And one feels, doesn't one, that there is a pressure that he's putting on himself to make sure that something comes out of this meeting. And that is very evident also in, as you mentioned, the language he uses, severe consequences for Mr. Putin if things don't go the way that he wants.
Absolutely. And, he's used this language before as well. He's talked about severe consequences against Russia ever since he became president for his second term. But he's actually not gone ahead with those statements and actually put them into action just yet. But having said that, in every press interaction we've seen, Miriam, when he talks about the case at hand, which in this case was Ukraine and Russia, he's immediately very quick to refer to the, deals that he has struck when it comes to India, Pakistan, when it comes to Thailand, Cambodia, when it comes to African nations and, others as well. He's very clear to publicize that as much as possible and make him, or at least project himself, to be this global leader who's able to get this done, where he is pitching himself as the man who is, at whose behest this meeting is happening on American territory. So he's very clear in his messaging. But what is also clear and significant, Miriam, is the fact that this has been one conflict that Donald Trump had said he would be able to stop within one day if he became president, but he has not been able to do that. And this has been elusive to him for a long time, which is what has led him to sort of display this kind of sense of impatience and frustration in repeated press interactions, where he's kind of, said that, look, I've been close to this, but it's not happened. And which is where also some of the worries stem from the European quarters in Ukraine, that in this sort of attitude or spirit of urgency, there shouldn't be concessions made which would be detrimental to the security and sovereignty of Ukraine, which is why you had that big summit earlier on, rather the meeting earlier on today, where European leaders essentially had that one window before Donald Trump goes into that meeting to put forth some of those important demands that Europe and Ukraine would have.
And also really interesting to kind of dive a little bit more deeper into the kind of elements of the meeting on Friday that are going to make Mr. Trump believe that it's a success. What would success, do you think, Runade, look like for Mr. Trump after that meeting in Alaska on Friday?
Well, it's a hard one, Miriam, given the fact that, he's also talked about, in a sense, lowering expectations, where he said, look, the first meeting, I'm just going to get a sense of what, this is all about. That's been the impression that he's been given out, saying that, this is going to be a listening session. He's going to hear from Vladimir Putin. And then he made it clear he wants to have a second very quick meeting with European leaders as well. He said that next call would go to Volodymyr Zelensky, and then the next call would go to European leaders in that order. He was very clear about that. So I think that second meeting is what is likely to be very important, because in the scenario where he's having that conversation with Vladimir Putin, clearly Vladimir Putin, who's been very, very adamant about what he wants and his demands, he's been absolutely clear about that. So there is a sense that he might not change his stand, in that meeting. But What happens and whether there is any kind of common ground that Donald Trump is able to sort of get out of that will then dictate the second meeting. So, it's very hard to say what exactly will make a good meeting, given that everyone has been very clear about their respective red lines. But I think we'll just have to see, how that first meeting goes and whether there is even a case for that second meeting.
OK, Arun Uday, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's cross live to our Ukraine correspondent who is currently in Berlin, James Waterhouse. And James, what are the key takeaways, do you think, that European leaders can be thinking about after today's conference?
Well, there are certainly some takeaways they're clinging to. I mean, it was clear when Volodymyr Zelensky and Friedrich Merz emerged from this virtual summit that some intense discussions had been taking place, but they were keen to outwardly at least project that it was a positive interaction. And they say Donald Trump agreed on a number of areas, including having a ceasefire first, which has long been a European demand, having the current front lines as a starting point for upcoming negotiations, and having any occupied territory by Russia legally recognized by the West as a non-starter. So these are big gains by Europe, but of course it's in the absence of taking the plane to Alaska later this week. Also, these are conditions, these are demands of the West. Vladimir Putin will have some conditions of his own when he sits opposite Vladimir Putin in his dream one-on-one format. This is ultimately going to be a negotiation, and you just need to look at the advancing Russian troops, notably at the moment in the eastern Donetsk region of Ukraine, that is fueling a confidence, a belief in the Kremlin that at the moment it doesn't need to compromise on either its goals in Ukraine or on the terms of how this war should end.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that this is such a big test, James, for European diplomacy and the efforts of European leaders not to be sidelined by Russia and by the United States. Do you think that in that sense it's been successful?
The simple answer is not yet, because Europe has been unable to change the White House's position that it should be in any way involved in peace talks. And these are peace talks that will shape security in the region and potentially borders, as much as Ukraine doesn't want to admit it, for decades or longer. And so politically, America has put more pressure on Europe to spend more on defence successfully. Europe is trying to show it is more independent in a security sense. Europe is expected by this administration in the White House to police peace in Ukraine going forward, and yet it's not at the table at all. So I think we've seen the Europeans focus on a single message of getting Ukraine to the table, getting Ukraine to have a say in some way on its destiny. But at the moment, when you consider the hurdles that are ahead in terms of what Vladimir Putin will propose on Friday, whether he will drag his heels further, because any delay equates to more death and destruction for Ukraine. That is the sort of crude calculation that goes on. So at the moment, I think in an immediate sense, there have been areas of reassurance for Europe, but there are going to be some nervous waits to see what is announced after what will be an extraordinary summit on Friday.
Thanks so much, James. James Waterhouse there in Berlin. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. Let's return to Ukraine now and see what all of this means for the territory being fought over. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams looks at what is at stake.
The Alaska summit, Donald Trump's first face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin for 6 years, is a big moment, but it's also one fraught with risk. Let's look at who controls what in Ukraine and what might be at stake in any peace agreement. We need to go back to 2014 to see Vladimir Putin's first move, the occupation and annexation of Crimea. That was followed by a Moscow-backed separatist movement in the area known as the Donbass, specifically the two regions or oblasts known as Donetsk and Luhansk. A war simmered there for 8 years. But in February 2022, Putin launched his full-scale invasion. Russian troops reached the outskirts of Kiev and seized huge swathes of the south, including big chunks of two more oblasts, Zaporizhia and Kherson. The war has ebbed and flowed ever since. Russia now controls around 20% of Ukraine. In the east, Russian forces are advancing, but very slowly and at great cost. President Zelensky says that what's needed now is an unconditional ceasefire. But in the run-up to his Alaska summit with Putin, President Trump has started talking instead about territorial swaps, causing shockwaves in Kyiv and across Europe. But what could these swaps mean, given that all the territory in question legally belongs to Ukraine? Let's look at the Donbass. Some reports suggest that Mr. Putin is demanding that Ukraine hand over the remaining territory it controls in both oblasts. But that would mean Kyiv giving up on places which tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have died trying to protect. For Kyiv, such a concession would represent a bitter pill. Ukraine's leader, President Zelensky, says Ukraine will not leave the Donbass. What about Zaporizhia and Kherson? Here, it's reported, Russia is offering to halt its offensive and freeze the lines. But would Moscow be prepared to give any of it back? It seems unlikely. This is all part of Vladimir Putin's strategically vital land bridge connecting Russia to occupied Crimea. Putin regards all these places as part of Russia. For Ukraine and Europe, territorial swaps at this very early stage are a non-starter. A discussion about future borders may eventually come, but only when the war has stopped and Ukraine's future security has been guaranteed.
That's Paul Adams there. Well, let's cross live and speak to our correspondent in Kyiv, Jana Bezpiatchuk. And Jana, first of all, let's talk about territory, because Mr. Zelensky has been pushing for any agreements that come out of Friday's meeting to work for him, to work for Ukraine in terms of territory. But how likely is it, do you think, that he will get what he wants, seeing as Ukraine is not even at the table?
Yeah. So I think it's likely, but with certain reservations. For Ukraine, it's a question of principle that first the ceasefire has to be declared by both sides. This ceasefire has to be comprehensive and unconditional. Unconditional is a key word. And then also, of course, there is a very important question of security guarantees, because before any territorial exchanges, as it's called by Trump and it's called in Russia, but it's not discussed like that in Ukraine, by the way. So before any issue of territories is raised, Ukraine needs to get assurances that the new Russian aggression, the new Russian attacks in the future will be to a certain extent contained, if not impossible at all. So, and only after ceasefire and security guarantees, the issue of our territories can be discussed and put at the table. So, of course, Zelensky now is trying, together with the European leaders, to highlight in all possible ways. They discussed this online with Trump, that the ceasefire has to be declared without this issue of swaps of territories in any possible way raised by Trump. And obviously Putin will raise it. There is no doubt. The question is how Trump will approach this. What will he say to Putin? That's a key thing. And I think here there is lots of uncertainty. And imagine that Ukrainian troops, they have been fighting very heavily with huge, enormous losses at huge costs for the lands, Ukrainian territories in the east, which Putin right now exactly wants to see freed by Ukrainian troops. And there is also one more important thing, which Zelensky raises, that if Ukrainian troops withdraw from the east of Ukraine, from the Donetsk region, which is one of the key things in all these discussions about swaps of territories, then Russia gets a very strong, effective and convenient platform or springboard for possible future invasion into the Ukraine's heartland, because these territories on the Ukrainian side, very fortified.
Okay, Jana, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for that update. Well, let's speak to former Ukrainian MP and former chair of the Ukrainian Foreign Relations Committee from 2014 to 19, Hanna Hopko. And Hanna, President Trump talked about a potential three-way meeting today. He said, didn't he, at one point, that if the meeting between him and Mr. Putin goes well on Friday, there might be another one between Mr. Putin, Zelensky and Mr. Trump. How likely do you think that is? And also, what do you think the reaction will be of Mr. Zelensky to sit opposite Mr. Putin if that does happen?
So first of all, I don't believe that Putin is ready to end the war, because previous attempt to propose a comprehensive ceasefire from Ukraine and the United States failed. And I'm sitting in Kyiv, in Ukraine, and this week we are luckily, but previously the daily ballistic terror, this was the way from Russia to push Ukraine for concessions, believing that we will give up, but we will never surrender. And actually, Putin wants to buy time because of the economic problems inside Russia. And there is no, how to say, Russian economic burden for the war is growing. And even Moscow admits it seeks a solution by 2026. So this is why Putin understands that without some steps or demonstration, like he keep playing Trump and the West by imitating that he is ready to consider, but he always demands what is unrealistic. So this is why I think let's see what's going to happen this Friday, but I'm less optimistic because it's already 11 years of ongoing Russian aggression, from invasion into Crimea in 2014 till now. Russia is not alone like it used to be, and it's in Chinese interest to support the war efforts from Russian side. And also when we see the North Korean